Hi, my name is Bernard from English One Trick Pony, and we're a channel which can help you to study for your final exams, whether it's the GCSEs, the A-levels, or the Abitur, the Matura, or any kind of other exam. Maybe you'd just like to know more about a certain topic. On this channel, we'll be covering a wide range of topics, including immigration, the environment, current political topics, or how to deal with literature. This series here is called the Bare Essentials, and it informs you about the basics of a certain topic. If you would like to delve deeper, you can subscribe and you will be informed about upcoming, more detailed videos on the same topic or new essentials on other topics. But let's get into the bare essentials of globalization. Globalization is a huge topic, and with any kind of huge topic, it's always good to start out at a specific definition. So in our case, we're defining globalization. Globalization is a historical process. This means it's not just something that's been around for a couple of years or decades. It's been around for centuries. It's a result of human innovation and technological progress. It describes the movement of goods, services, and capital across borders. And it also describes the movement of people, i.e. labor, or knowledge, technology. It has multiple dimensions, but in this video, we want to keep it relatively simple, only talk about 4. We're going to talk about the economic dimension. This will be the main focus. We'll also talk about the political dimension. We'll talk about the cultural dimension, and we will talk about the environmental dimension. So, back to the overview. Friedman says if we want to have a look at the historical process of globalization, we can subdivide that into 3 eras. First era starts in 1492 and goes up to roughly 1800. He calls this era 1.0. And here we have countries as dynamic agents. We have a shrinking of the world from size large to size medium. That's what Friedman says. And the explanation for this shrinking is the discovery of America. That's why we have 1492 here as the beginning. And the ongoing age of exploration, where many important seafarers went all over the world, people like James Cook and Christopher Columbus, for example, to find new territories and to connect them to their motherland. This is why we have countries as dynamic agents, because it was countries that sort of made this happen, that made these new connections, that also had the power to say what was going to happen to which part of the world. Then from 1800 to about around 2000, Friedman says we have era 2.0, and here we have different agents. Whereas we had countries in era 1.0, we have companies that are the agents now. So globalization in the era 2.0 was defined and spearheaded by companies. The effect was that it shrunk the world from size medium, after it already been interconnected in the years before, to size small. And the explanation was, on the one hand, we had the industrialization, which started at the end of the 18th century in Great Britain, but also the rise of private businessmen and a middle class. So from then on, the power of countries waned, and individuals took over this power. So we also have the beginning of the process of outsourcing in the 19th century, which also started in Great Britain, because labor had become so cheap that you couldn't get labor any cheaper, but you could get cheaper labor in other countries. So this started in the 19th century. Then Friedman says era 3.0 was from 2000 till the present. And the explanation here, I'm going to start with this, was the rapid spread of the internet and social media. So the effect was that it shrunk the world from size small to size tiny. And whereas before the internet sort of spread rapidly, especially in developed countries, whereas you could have products that had been produced all over the world. Now you could actually access places, people, firms all over the world with just a mouse click. So the agent now in this last era, third era of globalization, of course, there might be a fourth someday, is that we have individuals as agents. So individuals anywhere in the world can become connectors, they can become collaborators, and they also have become competitors. So, for example, if you look at your electronic device in front of you, this is an effect of era 2.0. It's made up of all sorts of different parts and ideas and technology designed all over the world. And with this device, you can connect to anyone in the world with just a click. And Friedman says this is where globalization really got going. Okay, back to the overview. Of course, when we talk about globalization, we want to talk about whether it's a positive process overall or whether it's more negative than positive. And in the list I'm going to give you of pros and cons, this is a very short list, right? This is just a list that I came up with, that I've selected, and for example, I used my Collins's The Pros and Cons of Globalization, which was published in Forbes magazine. So I picked some of them out. So in the 1990s, Collins says we had enormous support and the belief that everyone would benefit from globalization. Possible economic benefits: by advocating free or freer trade on a worldwide market, globalization promotes global economic growth and creates jobs. That is a fact. It makes companies more competitive because they have competitors all over the world and thus lowers prices for consumers. That is also a fact. It provides poor countries, through infusions of foreign capital and technology, with the chance to develop economically. It can reduce poverty in those countries, and it can lift global living standards. Benefits in other areas are, for example, that it creates the conditions in which democracy and respect for human rights may flourish. For example, developed countries might say, we're only going to trade with you if you change something. For example, if you sort of make child labor illegal, that could be one of those benefits. And it also promotes cultural intermingling and more influx of information between countries, which then itself speeds up globalization again. So some very, very heavy pros on the one side. Let's go into the con side. And here I quoted Stiglitz. So by the 2000s, the movement against globalization has become one of the largest movements worldwide. So if you want to check out the Occupy movement, for example, you can see what they stand for and what they criticize about globalization. So from the 90s to the 2000s, we have huge support to one of the largest movements against something worldwide. And this is because economic studies show that globalization works asymmetrically. So less developed countries or poorer countries are actually worse off. So while rich countries profit, poorer countries sometimes actually suffer. They are worse off through globalization. And I want to make one example, and that is agriculture. So industrialized nations, they can demand poorer countries to open up their markets and eliminate their subsidies. And this is not a theoretical thing, this is something that has been going on for quite some time. So they themselves do not eliminate their subsidies and do not totally open their markets. For example, in agriculture, subsidies were and are being kept on agriculture, and markets are partly closed to products from the outside. So, of course, this is done to protect jobs. In Germany, for example, but it's the same in Great Britain, we heavily subsidize agriculture because otherwise there would be no one farming in Germany anymore, because it's just not, you don't earn enough money from farming, only with the subsidies that the state pays. So on the one hand, we have subsidies and we have partly closed markets. On the other hand, developing countries cannot do this. So agriculture is the most important area in many poor countries. In many countries, actually 70% of the population directly or indirectly work in the agricultural sector. So in order to keep up with the products supported by subsidies that are produced in industrialized nations, developing countries don't have too many tools to actually do this. So one tool, which of course is possible, is to lower the income of people who work in the sector. And this happens quite often. So while developing countries play a role in the global market, their workers do not profit from it, but it can actually decrease their earnings. So, and some people have rightly called these practices neocolonialist practices, or they've called this system a system of neocolonialism. Another con of globalization is that globalization leads to greater environmental destruction for obvious reasons. Producing cheap means producing against the environment. So I quickly want to jump into globalization, neocolonialism, just because I think there might still be some question marks sort of bobbing above some heads. So let's quickly talk about this. I have two definitions here, one of neocolonialism, and that is the practice of using capitalism, globalization, and cultural imperialism to influence a developing country instead of the previous colonial methods of direct military control or indirect political control. And cultural imperialism, just because it came up here, refers to the creation and maintenance of unequal relationships. So we could see this in our example of agriculture, between civilizations, favoring a more powerful civilization. So, of course, we can define different dimensions of neocolonialism or neocolonialist subjugation. I want to pick up four here. One is economic. We've focused on that one. The other one is political. Then cultural. So quite often we have this idea of a Leitkultur, that is a dominant culture and a subjugated culture, where the dominant culture is sort of seen as the superior culture, the better culture, and we have this quote unquote inferior culture, which is sort of indirectly repressed. So we can think of things like beauty ideals or other things that are shared, especially on social media or also on traditional media. Think of Hollywood, for example. The last thing is linguistic subjugation, and that is also we have a dominant language and less dominant language, and the dominant language replacing the less dominant language. It might be step for step, or it might be just quickly done by changing the law. Okay, so having looked at the definition, talked about the three eras, and gone into pros and cons of globalization, so the question is, well, what can we say about globalization overall? What kind of process is it? Is it positive? Is it negative? And of course, we have to see it, well, split. Globalization per se is not a bad thing. It has many good opportunities. But although some countries have benefited heavily, other countries and the environment have suffered. So we need to uphold the positive mechanisms of globalization, but also change the unfair ways in which it is partly managed. If you have any questions about the presentation so far, about globalization as a whole, feel free to post them into the comments. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you have any further questions about globalization, maybe a certain aspect you'd want us to make a video on, please also post that into the comments. And if you have any other ideas for topics that you would really like to have sort of know the bare essentials, then also post them into the comments, please, below. There's one thing I want to leave you with, and I think it's a very good summary, and it's a quote by Barack Obama when he talked about globalization also sort of being faced with the pros and cons. He said, well, what we can do is to shape how that process of global integration, globalization, proceeds so that it increases opportunities for ordinary people. So it's creating better jobs. So we are strengthening protections for workers. So we are addressing some of the environmental challenges that come with rapid growth. Okay, guys, that's what I want to leave you with. My name is Bernard from English One Trick Pony, and I will see you in the next video.